Hello and welcome to 15 Minutes on Shiraz. Now, our monthly series focusing on varieties is always 15 minutes, but actually, this month it's going to end up being 30 minutes because we're going to do two 15-minute segments on Shiraz because it's such a big subject. It's our historic variety. It's grown in all regions, and so we're going to give it a little bit more love this particular month. But for our first session, so part one is going to focus on the history and heritage and old vines that represent a lot of the classic wines made from Shiraz in Australia. So it's one of our most significant varieties. There's no question. It's, 4 out of every 5 wineries grows some Shiraz. It represents about 40 to 50% of what's actually grown in Australia, and almost a total of a quarter of the total actual production. Now, the word Shiraz is something that we've kind of taken and made our own, if you like, but it is the same variety as Syrah. For those of you that know Syrah globally or Shiraz, they are the same variety. It's just we've chosen to stick with the word Shiraz, not Syrah. So today we're going to have a look at the history of Shiraz. We're going to look at old vines, and we'll look at some of the classic regions, the regions that sort of established the reputation and greatness of Shiraz initially. So original vines came to Australia in the early 1800s. And the cool thing about it was a lot of the original Shiraz came, along with other varieties, came at a time that was before phylloxera, the advent of phylloxera in Europe. So it was in about the 1820s, 1830s, when the vast majority of vines came in, Shiraz being one of the prominent ones. So with that in mind, Australia is now home to the largest collection of old vine, that's ungrafted, original rootstock Shiraz vines in the world. We have the biggest collection, most of which sits in Barossa, McLaren Vale, and some of the regions we're going to discuss today. It thrived in these warmer climate zones. The original colonies, as they were setting up, it turned out to be one of the top varieties. However, now it's grown in virtually every region in Australia, and there's a full range of styles and different flavor profiles. I will strongly argue that when it comes to this particular variety, there's no country or region on the planet that can do with Shiraz what we can do, because we've got that full range of climates and different sort of exposures. Regional expression right now is defining this modern look of Shiraz. I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Key regions in Australia. This is just a snapshot right here up on the screen now of some of the more famous areas, some of the areas you're likely to see that are being exported. But the reality is it's grown into virtually every region. Tasmania, not necessarily known for Shiraz. However, there are a couple of really famous, really well-made wines coming out of Tasmania. So really in every single pocket, every single corner of Australia, Shiraz is being grown. Today, we're going to really focus in on the Barossa Valley. We've got a wonderful guest speaker, Ben Glaetzer, coming on shortly. But he's made wine in Barossa, McLaren Vale, and down in Langhorne Creek. But South Australia is a hotbed of some really classic, warmer climate Shiraz, except for possibly Adelaide Hills. That ends up being sort of a bit more cooler climate. We'll look at that in the next session. Barossa, without a doubt, one of Australia's oldest and best-known regions, period, but certainly Shiraz regions. Barossa Shiraz is the most widely available and best-known red wine in the global marketplace. No question at all. Any wine store of decent wine store, wine shop you go into, you will see Shiraz, and you'll see a good proportion of those being Barossa Shiraz. Very important in the blends, as I mentioned. Generally speaking, we're talking about full-bodied, richly textured wines with black fruit, pepper, and spice characters. There's a little style shift over the last 10 years or so, and Ben's going to chat with me about that when we get there. Part of Barossa, though, is also the Eden Valley. That's also part of the greater Barossa zone. Also, very important piece of understanding the Barossa puzzle. Higher altitude vineyards, later harvest timing, home to a very, very famous wine globally called Hill of Grace, but there's some medium to full-bodied Shiraz with a bit more peppery sage and blackberry notes. So Eden Valley is part of it. The blends between them as well are really, really important, but it is a separate region, but within the greater region of Barossa. Here's what I love about Barossa, and I wish the rest of Australia would adopt this. They've got an old vine charter. So when we use the term old vine in Barossa, it is not exactly mandated, but it's codified, if you like. So to be able to use the term old vines, minimum age is 35 years. There is a next level, which is survivor vines, 70 plus years. Anything over 100 is centenarian. And then there's this lovely little sort of icing on the cake of ancestor vines, anything over and above 125 years of age. That exists in Barossa and Barossa alone right now. And I love it. I think it's a wonderful idea. And I like this idea of being able to sort of quantify what old vines means. And I'm hoping the rest of Australia adopts it. But right now it's a Barossa thing. And you will start to see these on labels. Questions. I got a bunch of questions that we're going to hopefully try and answer, and we're going to get Ben on in a minute. But old vines, do they make better wines? Let's get Ben Glaetzer from Glaetzer Wines on there. Ben, are you there?
Yeah, here, Mark. How are you?
Good morning. You're in Barossa right now, aren't you?
Lovely sunny spring day today.
Awesome. Good. I heard you've had good rains, and it's going to be a nice setup for the season ahead, I hear.
Yeah, look, it's good. It's in coming off 2021, which obviously we've completed now. One of the best harvests we've had for a long time. So, yeah, with the good rainfall, good spring rains, we should be going pretty well for an excellent 2022 again, which is something to look forward to.
Excellent. Okay, so Barossa's your home. I know you've made wines in Langhorne Creek, McLaren Vale, and other places. But people talk about Barossa and people try and tell me, oh, is that like your Napa Valley? I mean, I can sort of see why people make those comparisons. I think it's quite different, quite special, and also quite a bit smaller than Napa Valley and more tight. But what is it about Barossa that is so special? And specifically Shiraz, but in general for as viticulture, but specifically as a Shiraz producing region, what makes it special, do you think?
I think there's a myriad different reasons, I think. Ultimately, I think climate is one. We have very generous summer times. Now, people often would consider the Barossa to be hot climate. I like to think of it more sort of warm, in that we have really good, nice warm summer days. Occasionally we get heat spikes in much the same way as every other grape-growing nation around the place. But our winters are actually very cold. This morning was -2 degrees here, and it'll get to, as in -2 Celsius. We'll get to about sort of 18 to 20 Celsius today for a spring day, which enables a really nice, even growing season. Then during the summer, we still, although we have some heat spikes, it still maintains relatively cool nights, which helps for maturation of flavour. But we get a generosity of really bright, plummy fruit, good dark flavours in our wines, and in particular Shiraz, which we're talking about today. It really lends itself to all different styles. You can harvest Shiraz early in Barossa and get a green, almost vegetal characteristic with some grippy tannin. And alternatively, some producers decide to harvest quite late, in which you get some interesting wines that are thick and sort of quintessentially what people consider to be Barossa. But what's happened, certainly over the last 20, 25 years, is there has been a huge number of really well-made wines that fit in what I call the balance profile, which is where they show the generosity of Barossa, so we see the warmness of the day, but they also have a freshness and a purity, which is exactly what I aspire to do here.
Cool. We're going to address that sort of shift in style. But I think it's interesting what you mentioned, because I've certainly been in Barossa. I was there in December 2002, notoriously cool. I was cold, and that's December, bearing in mind that's getting to your summer months there. And it was surprisingly cold at night there. And so I think that's important. So while it is, generally speaking, it's hard, in the middle of a summer day during the growing season to say, yeah, no, Barossa can be cool. But boy, I've felt it there, and I've experienced it. So old vines. Now, I think one of the great stories that we have about vineyards in Australia, specifically Barossa, because there's such a repository of brilliant old vines there, never mind just Shiraz. But we keep banging on about it. What does it matter? You've been growing them and you've been working with them for years. What do you think makes a difference with old vineyard sites that you're working with as opposed to young sites?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a question that is often raised. I mean, pre all the lockdowns, etc. I'd be spending 4.5 months a year overseas, and we export to 38 countries. So there's a vast array of diversity of cuisines and palates there. One of the big questions is always, you have such old vines, which for us is a legacy and it's a real asset. Do they really contribute? Now, the answer to that really is the reason these vines are old is because they do produce good quality fruit. And it has been deemed over the generations that they are producing quality. Therefore, they've maintained their position in the vineyard. So that's the basic answer, is if they weren't performing on a quality level, then they would have been replaced with something else quite some time ago. Yeah, for a second, I'll skip through that. So that's the ultimate one there. In terms of do old vines make better quality wine? I mean, that's going to be a 100-year-old perennial argument. In my view, some of our vineyards, the majority of vineyards are between 120. Our oldest vineyards are 144 years old, so that is significant in terms of vine age. And as you're aware, Mark, and some of the viewers may be aware, the Barossa has the oldest Shiraz vines in the world, which is a great way to be. We don't have phylloxera. The majority of Shiraz that are aged from, let's say, 35, 40 years old up to those 140, 150-year-old vines are all on own roots. One of the great things about the Barossa is we have a huge diversity of different soil types as well. Now, soil really does contribute a lot, but also there's a protective mechanism with our sandy soils we have here, because phylloxera, which you mentioned earlier, has not been present in South Australia, certainly not in the Barossa Valley. A lot of that is because the sandy soils make it very difficult for it to move in between vines. So we have this luxury of having own-rooted, super old vines. When the vines are in that sort of 60 to 120, 130, 140-year-old bracket, they do inherently have less crop. So old vines do generally lead to more concentration of fruit, less crop, therefore, I guess, a true concentrated expression of what younger vines can do. Now, bear in mind, the younger vines I have for our vineyards are 35 years old, so they're young by
Technically still old vines.
Yeah, they're technically still old vines as well.
Now, last but not least, I've seen such a change in the last probably even 10, possibly 15 years, and you and I have discussed this before, but the word, you've even used it. I never thought Barossa, Shiraz and freshness would end up in the same sentence, and I use it all the time. So what's happened in that? Because it's not like those old vines are changing, but there's something happening in terms of how people are making wine. So if there was a top couple of things, one or two things that you think have shifted and changed, like maybe through what you're doing, what are they? What's making for this freshness, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact the world has got a lot smaller. So a lot of winemakers, vignerons from Australia and let's say the rest of the world are able to travel to different regions and experience firsthand different production techniques and I guess a different lens through which you look at your own home. So for me, growing up in the wine industry, I made my first wine when I was 14. Really, my focus has been on freshness. Now, traditionally, back in the late 70s and early 80s, the Barossa Valley was renowned for big sort of tarry, old school, let's say rustic style red wines that were good and they have their place.
Absolutely.
In the early 90s through to probably the early 2000s, that shifted to the wines that were big, let's say interesting liquids in some way, wines you can stand a spoon up in, and they're impressive, but I wouldn't particularly want to go and drink those. Now, they are an expression of that particular winemaker's style. My sort of interpretation of the flavours of the grapes I'm tasting in the vineyard is what I try to get through into the bottle. So ultimately for me, that is picking based on flavour is critical. In the Barossa, we get this lovely rounded mouthfeel when the grapes are just starting to become ready to harvest, but I'm still looking for savoury tannin. Now, structural tannin is critical. So basically, rather than saying the wines are big and jammy, I've drilled it down. I want to have tannin and I want to have brightness and acidity. That's another key aspect. You're absolutely spot on. Probably 10 to 15 years ago, there would have been very few people who would have used Barossa Valley Shiraz and elegance in the same sentence. Now, we are seeing more and more and more of those. Bear in mind, it's never going to be a Burgundy. We don't want it to be Burgundian style. We're not making Pinot. We're making rich, ripe styles, but you can still do that with generosity and balance and restraint. Now, that also comes in with winemaking techniques, and again, the travel thing really works with that because people are experiencing different wine knowledge and wine philosophies. The critical thing for me is this savoury tannin and bright acidity. Now, when we hand harvest these vines, we bring them into the winery. I guess one thing that I've always done is I'm very strong on making sure that our ferments, for reds in particular, do not get hot. I want to keep everything as cold as I possibly can, and I'm talking, you can convert into Fahrenheit because I can't do it this time of the morning.
I'd still struggle.
We're talking, none of my red ferments will get above 18 degrees Celsius. The temperature maintains the freshness on the aromatic profile. A hot ferment blows off the aromatics pretty quickly and it turns into more volatile compounds. So we're maintaining the aromatics, but we're also getting this lovely extraction of savoury tannin, not just a big boot of tannin right in the middle.
Awesome.
And I think also contributing to that is access to far better oak we have now as well. Again, the world is small and there are so many producers of excellent quality French and American and other Baltic nations oak. And I think people are they're enjoying wines for the freshness, not for just the sheer impressive force of it.
No, that's good. And I like what you said. There's a really important point. We'll have to wrap up here, but a really important point you make is that green and unripe is not Barossa. Barossa, I want the richness and comfort to my mind that is Barossa without it being overblown, and there's still that freshness and savoury tannin. That's a brilliant point. Awesome stuff. It makes me want to reach into my. Sorry, I got a couple of nice Barossa beauties in there. It's evening here, so I might just sort of lean. It's morning there, but you can lean in. Wonderful stuff, Ben. Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it. I love the comment on travel. I'm hoping we get back to it soon because the world has become a bigger place for just the temporarily. But look forward to seeing you at some point in the near future. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mark. See you.
And that's it for the first part of Shiraz in Australia. Stay tuned for the second part to this, which is 15 minutes on Shiraz. We can look at cool climates and changing styles.